Welcome everybody to this Kalidasia live stream. I'm Jason, the creator of the Kalidasia universe, and today we're moving on to part 4 of painting this guy right here, the Heragul Hammerhead miniature. I've been trying to do a really nice paint job of this to get a good online store photo for it, because the one like I have there now, it's a little... I have a decent mackerel, which is the anti-aircraft version of this, but the Hammerhead one, I went a little bit overboard on the washes. Didn't look very good. So I'm going to be painting this guy up for about the next hour. And what I think I want to talk about tonight, I'm doing a complete brain dump episode. Not that every episode is more or less me doing a brain dump. But I want to toss out some ideas, mainly for myself, because I was asked by one of my fans of Kalidasia Universe to give them some ideas for a narrative campaign set in the Kalidasia Universe. So I'm going to just kind of toss out some thoughts that I had on this topic. So eventually, in the not too distant future, I can kind of coalesce them into a much shorter, much more useful video than a 1-hour rambling thing. But let me slide over to the work camera. Oh, there's a mouse in the way, and I can get started painting. What I'm going to be painting tonight on this guy is I'm working on all the different cooling vents that you've got all over the ship here. There are tons of little cooling fins and whatever they may be, along with other metal objects like the gun barrels and more cooling things in the bottom. The thing I'm trying different that I have than what I've used on previous miniatures is on things like the Pale Fox. I found that the base coat I use, which is Dawnstone Gray from Games Workshop's Citadel paint line, had a fairly rough pigment when mixed with water, so it would create a very textured look on the cooling vents, which frankly you can't see looking at from this distance. When I hit it with a macro lens on my camera, it was really very visible and didn't look very good. So I shoveled out some money for this stuff, the Lemaine Medium, which I guess is basically the paint minus the pigment. I'm using that to thin it down, and it seems to be working better. But I've also been using a new pod of the Dawnstone Gray paint, so that may just be better than the old one that I had that's more or less dried up. So it's possible this fancy stuff is doing nothing, and just the fact that I'm actually using fresh paint is what is really making it work. Anyway, wet palettes coming back out here. And I'm just going to be taking my artificial layer extra small brush here, mixing some of this Dawnstone Gray down on my palette, and then I'll be mixing in some of the Lemaine Medium into it to thin it down, and that's going to serve as the base coat for all the different little bits and cooling fins on the Heragul warships. And of course, if you're joining me here live on twitch.tv, feel free to ask any questions in the chat room about what is going on, or if you have any questions about running a tabletop game company. And of course, if you're watching this later on YouTube, you may feel free to go ahead and post a comment in the video there, something I can address on a future video. Alright, so I was talking about doing a little bit of a brain dump about running campaigns in the Kalidasia universe. So I think the first thing in terms of coming up with a narrative of what's going on is to kind of understand the overall tactics of not tactics, that's the wrong word. The strategic aspect of the battles in the Kalidasia universe. And you kind of figure out how you can weave an Heragul versus Surikari storyline in there, or if you really want to, even come up with an Heragul versus Heragul or Surikari versus Surikari story. There's a lot of fun with that, and more of those things will be explored later on. But the basic gist, of course, right now is the Surikari Empire. The Surikari Empire, they're not really called the Empire. The Surikari are invading the Heragul Empire, attacking multiple planets at once. In a relatively, their overall tactics are very slow, starving out siege mentality. The reason for that goes back to the Battle of Minix 6, which was where the Heragul Empire forces, led by Captain Tsar Xlet, essentially stalled the Surikari out in this gas giant planet with a whole bunch of massive kind of ring system, asteroids falling around it and things like that. And they were able to effectively stall out this massive Surikari fight by all sorts of forms of deception in such a way that it allowed enough time to build the defenses at Minix 4 and Minix 3 to stop the Surikari invasion at that point.
So what the Surikari did is, instead of concentrating all their forces on a single planet, they spread them out across multiple planets in such a way that ideally some planet somewhere, they're going to break through and be able to capture it and do damage. Now, to understand the goals of the siege mentality, when it comes to the Heragul Empire, one thing to note is that the vast majority of planets are not self-sufficient. Much like how your typical modern city is not self-sufficient, there's very few cities, if any, in the modern world that, if cut off from the outside world, could really last for very long. Most cities don't produce food. Many cities don't have good access, local access to enough water. Not to mention, getting things like medical supplies and producing industrial components and all that kind of stuff that a city needs to function. So you can really think of planets in the Heragul Empire in that fashion. Very few of them, like I said, are truly self-sufficient. Most, for example, lack water and or food. Oh, excuse me there, a little. So most of them are simply incapable of growing food that the Heragul can eat. A lot of the planets have no breathable atmosphere. They have atmospheres, but they're not very friendly to the Heragul for breathing for whatever reason. There's not a lot of local plants, so. And in a lot of cases, it's simply just too cold to raise any kind of agriculture that the Heragul are familiar with. Now, the one thing the Heragul Empire does have plenty of is lots of energy. They have a hydrogen-based energy system, a lot of fusion power. So they can theoretically produce or build like greenhouses and things that could raise lots of food, but that's not really practical when you look into the kind of numbers that a large reptilian creature, or just a human for that matter, would really require. That's not an easy thing to accomplish, even if you would theoretically have enough energy to light and heat these massive greenhouses. So if you can cut off the supplies of a planet, it probably won't hold out very long, and at the very least, you're going to start causing a lot of chaos and riots and uncertainty and rebellion and all sorts of awful stuff that come along with the planet basically being starved to death. So that's why the overall goal of the Surikari is to prevent resources from getting into the planet, but also whatever that planet provides to the rest of the Empire, if they can stop that coming out of the planet, then they can also negatively impact other economies, other planets, and make other local planets, or wherever the particular resources go to, make them even more vulnerable. Case in point here with the current Albion Prefecture campaign, which, by the way, Phase 3 just ended a little while ago. Heragul won a minor victory, just barely, at Albion 8, so the planet is not really, it's under siege, but the planet is not blockaded at the moment. It's still hanging in there. But like, for example, with Cadre 4, that is a major food producer for a good portion of the Albion Prefecture, and also produces a very delicacy that's seen all across the Empire, the shale plant. So if that planet were to be cut off from the Empire, even by a little bit, it doesn't have to necessarily fall. Even if you saw like a reduction in 50% of its output, that would reduce the effectiveness of many of the local planets. So consider the fact that, like I just mentioned, that planets are not self-sustaining. They need this flow of resources in and out to survive, and the outflows for other planets. So not only can the Surikari try to block the individual planet itself, but by going after neighboring planets that somehow have an economic tie to the local planet, then the Surikari can attempt to disrupt other planets and make them easier to capture. Now, it's very unlikely the Surikari really fully understand the economics of the Heragul Empire. I haven't really talked a whole lot about Surikari society. I made some comments here and there. There's a lot in the Battle for Silex digital download series, which is a series of PDFs. You can read the story $2 over at kalidasia.com/products. Or you can find them, I'm pretty sure you can find them over on the Amazon Kindle store, as well as the Barnes & Noble Nook store, if that thing's still around. I really don't know. I think it is. I haven't, anyway. I don't think I've got any emails from Barnes & Noble in a long time, so maybe it doesn't exist anymore. I honestly don't pay attention. But the point of all that, well, see, this is what I mean by brain dump. I just kind of jump around, and I'm kind of sorting it out in my head as to what I want to talk about. Now, shoot. So the Surikari may not necessarily know exactly what the economics of the Heragul Empire are, but they can probably look at a planet and figure out more or less what it does. And they can, once they get ground troops on it, they know the difference between a farm and a factory, that kind of thing. Even though they are a totally alien civilization, they can recognize technology, they can recognize plants and food production. That kind of stuff is going to be understood by pretty much every alien race, any kind of civilized, oh, for crying out loud, civilized alien race out there is going to be able to recognize that stuff. They're going to know the difference of those things. So the Surikari, even though they don't know the details of the Heragul economy, they can kind of figure out how things are going, and they realize that these planets, they cut off these resources coming in and out, and it negatively affects not only the planet but the neighboring planets. So how that plays into a narrative campaign is you don't necessarily have to have the story about who's going to win the planet. There's a lot of interesting politics and drama that can be brought in if you even start off the assumption the Surikari are going to win the planet. And now you got to figure out who's going to survive the invasion. Is someone going to try to make a run for it? It's not crazy to think that the political leadership of a planet under a Surikari invasion is going to say, screw it, I'm running, I don't feel like dying on my home planet. They're going to make a run for it. There's things like that you can take into account. And also, you can make up a situation where whatever planet you're fighting at, it's somehow been negatively affected by a nearby Surikari invasion. And that already starts a situation of the story off in a bit of a very stressful situation for the Heragul defenders. And it may be, because of that, it may mean the Heragul defenders cannot win the battle of the planet. And it's kind of a story of how they deal with the fact that things are falling apart all around them. And of course, it doesn't have to be that way. It could be some story of Heragul redemption. They break through the Surikari lines, reinforcements show up at the last moment. Because we are now finally, I say finally, because the frickin' complaining about the rate. Here I am complaining about the rate that I release my own products, because the Kalidasia Fleet Commander came out almost 2 years ago, and now finally we're getting to the point of where Operation Octavius, the Heragul counteroffensive in the Heragul Empire, Albanian Prefecture, is finally going down. In fact, that's kind of what I'm hoping to run some games for this weekend at PenguinCon. But I don't know, we'll see what happens. Where was I going with all this? Oh yeah, so that was all just about explaining some of the ways you can kind of set up an initial drama, an initial conflict within a planet, other than simply it being Surikari are attacking, Heragul are... Is this the... Oh yeah, that's... I screwed up a pot of paint. Fortunately, I don't use it very often. It's like the Kolith Guard. I have some Evil Sun Scarlet, which I happen to have left the pot open overnight. Oops. Don't do that. That's how you throw away $4 in GW paint. But anyway, so now we kind of set up how you can show you can use the current storyline to kind of set up some dramatic situations. Or, you could... I wonder, because I really haven't talked a whole lot about the motives of the Surikari. That'll come in eventually. But you could also, but we know, here's some things, you know, if you want to maybe tell a storyline from the Surukari perspective. I don't have any second edition stuff for the Koithgard out yet, but there's definitely a really cool Surukari versus Koithgard battle that's going on. You can, another thing, you're going to see more of this in an upcoming expansion. If you want to tell a different type of story for the Heragul Empire, you have what are called the Abandoned Fleets. This is what, if you the original launch story for the game, like the series of short stories are released after the start of the game, was the Flight of the Tyroner 1. Now, those guys eventually made it to rendezvous with the Sarlacc Command battle fleet. If you've read the Battle for Sarlacc series again, and want to get it out, the upcoming series short story series I'm working on right now. I think Captain Harkylon, his name gets dropped. I don't know if he has a role in it, but he shows up. He's kind of mentioned again, and he's one of those guys. But the Abandoned Fleets are the groups of warships that essentially their planets were lost to the Surukari, but they themselves were not destroyed. They fled the battle because the battle was lost, and maybe they don't really know what to do, because you're in a situation where, you know, like when the Flight of the Tyroner 1, they fled their main planet, the Tyrona system, because it was lost, and they jumped right into the middle of a battle at Silex. And so, you know, you don't know from their perspective necessarily. They did eventually got lucky and made it back to friendly territory, but it's quite possible a lot of these fleets, after they fled the fact that they lost their home worlds, they don't really know how much of the Empire is left, what's friendly territory, what's not. So they're hanging out in deep space, which these Heragul warships were not really ever meant to do. They were meant to hang around close to planets with relatively nearby robust supply lines. A lot of them, you know, so you get in a very stressful situation that way, where they don't know what's going on. There could be some anger with maybe they had to leave civilians behind on the planets. Maybe someone's families got left behind on these planets when they had to flee. They didn't know the fate of them. So there's a whole great storylines to investigate there, with maybe your narrative campaign revolves around one of these abandoned fleets. I'm going to write more about this in an upcoming expansion later on this, well, you know, I would like to say later on this year, but I don't make promises anymore when it comes to releasing Kalidasia stuff. I have only a limited amount of time to really do all this, so I do the best I can, is what I say. But that's another example, a totally different approach you can use to the game. If you wanted to make almost like a player versus game master type of scenario, so it wouldn't necessarily be player versus player, you would have the player be the Heragul Abandoned Fleet, and then the game master is there just to kind of play the Surukari and create fun scenarios to create a challenging, unique environment for the Heragul player. It's not really one player's got to win and one's got to lose. If you want to do a more almost like role-playing type situation, then you can have ships get upgraded and give them weird special rules, and they can come across abandoned stuff, and they can, there's a lot of fun, crazy things you can do like that. But back to the whole planetary invasion thing. So let's talk a little bit about how the planetary invasions kind of play out. Like I said, the main goal of the Surukari is really just to blockade the planet. You blockade the planet, it's gonna fall. It may take a while. You're probably gonna have to land ground troops at some point, just to get rid of who are the last defenders are left. But it's quite possible that by simply blockading the planet, you're going to cut off a whole heck of a lot of organized resistance. And there isn't really any evidence so far to suggest that the Surukari are using any amount of weapons of mass destruction against the Heragul. So we've seen, once again, Battle of Silex. We've seen something that I refer to internally as the Deathbringer Behemoth, It's the massive ship that bombards the planet. That's the very beginning of Secrets of Silex, so it's not really a spoiler. It happens very early on in the story. The second book, anyway. But in terms of like biological weapons, the Surukari don't seem to use those. Nuclear weapons, nothing quite like that in the Surukari side. Heragul have them, and they do use them. But for the most part, the Surukari don't. But we don't really have a whole lot of information about what goes on in these ground battles. Like in Silex Road, there was definitely some ground fighting going on. The trailer for Heroes of the Heragul, some more ground fighting going on, but that was there's a little bit of story behind that. So anyway, considering the fact that the objective of the Surukari is really to strangle the planet and get rid of all its resources, here's how they would go about this, kind of from a very strategic perspective in terms of a multi-phased invasion plan. First up, I wonder if that's that weird noise that I hear every now and then. I hear my microphone picks up these weird noises every now and then when I listen back to this thing, and I think what it is, it's probably me hitting the table or something that's causing a shock to go through the microphone stand. I wonder if I should. I have a little here. I'm rambling again. My microphone doesn't have a It's not shock isolated right now. I do have a shock isolating mount for my Rode microphone up here. I've got the Rode NTG N something 2. It's some combination of those letters. I bought it a couple years ago. I honestly don't remember what it is, but see.
Probably says on the side, doesn't it? NTG2.
If anyone's ever wondering. That hovers just a bit out of the view of the main camera. That's why you can never see it. It's literally an inch out of frame. That's why I can get some fairly good audio. It's a fantastic microphone. Fantastic microphone. But anyway, back to Surukari planets. I was just thinking to myself again about how to address issues with the audio production value. I'll probably do that in a few weeks. I'm thinking of getting rid of the main light that I've got right in front of me. If you ever notice when I'm on my main camera, I'm like glowing white. It's because I have the equivalent of 200 watts of light blasting me in the face from about a foot away, and that's the main light. And it's a old 1960s. Man, I'm really I'm like really going off the rails here. Really going off the rails, but it's 2 CFL bulbs, the 100 watt equivalent, on like this 1960s Mayfair Flex Master like photographer light kit. Oh goodness, I think my dad had it from when he was in college or something, and it was in my parents' basement forever. And despite doing video for like 10 years, my dad finally asked me, hey, I have this light kit. Do you want it? I'm like, well, heck yeah, I'll take it. And it used any sort of typical screw-in light bulb, and it worked great. But the thing is, the biggest problem with it now is it's just big. So the tripod takes up about half the desk, so I lose half my workspace. And when I start redoing the cosplay stuff, the Heragul Special Forces guy that I always have behind me here, I want to probably do that after I'm done with this series. Start working on that. I need the desk space back. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is replace this light rig, still keep this light rig, but move it over to, I have a second, let me point over towards the camera, there we go, okay, there we go. Nice shot of my thumb. No, but behind the camera, I have a second light rig that's got 400 watts equivalent of CFL to it. And that's providing kind of this fill light, so you get I get a nice good lighting setup. That light rig over there is something custom built that I made a number of years ago. And when I say custom, I literally mean custom wired. I wired it myself, which I have a history of robotics. I'm reasonably competent with electricity. I don't normally do house wiring. In fact, I don't think I've ever done house wiring other than that light rig right there. So that may be a bit of a cause for concern, but it's a very basic light project. I can do that kind of stuff without starting fires, and it's ran fine for years without starting a fire. But I wouldn't mind getting rid of that in favor of the actual professionally manufactured one, which had a lifetime warranty on it. For the 1960s. Remember when you had lifetime warranties on products instead of like 1 year? Because they were made to actually last for a while, not 1 year. Fantastic concept, isn't it? Anyway, I wonder if I assume the Mayfair that made this thing is still the Mayfair company that's around right now. Not obviously not the Mayfair Games company, the appliance company. If they would actually honor that lifetime warranty if it ever broke, but this sucker is a tank. It ain't gonna break. Oh, I went out. No, just kidding. But I'm gonna replace that with a LED light panel. There's some really not very expensive LED light panels. You can get some kind of cheap Chinese-made ones, which I grant they're probably all the LED light panels are made in China at this point, even the really expensive ones. But they probably don't have the best quality control. But I can stick one of those on the wall, take up no space, and actually get a very similar amount of light out of them, especially when it's being used at such close range. The video guy at work has a couple of those. My day job has a couple of those. Is playing with them. They're actually pretty nice. So that would let me get rid of this tripod. It would free up half the desk. So I could go back to doing large-scale projects on this little film desk here. And what I might do is, for the main camera, both cameras that I have are Canon HF200s. They are very old prosumer-grade cameras from about 8 years ago. They first showed up at the end of Season 3 of the Tabletop Battlefield, and I've been using them ever since. One's SD card reader stopped, so it's now just a permanent live streaming camera. So I'll probably keep that one and move that one over here to this camera, the work camera. And as long as it looks halfway decent, I think I'm going to use my old 2nd gen GoPro, which, it's good enough quality. Stick that on the wall below the light panel. And that is going to allow me to then have effectively no desk space, or very little desk space, being taken up by audio video gear. I still have my H5N, which is what the microphone runs through. It's the USB interface to the computer. But it'll mean I can actually, reclaim most of this desk space for actual doing really cool projects on video. It'd be nice. Because HF200 for the forward camera is also mounted on a tiny little tripod, one of those little things. I think I bought it from Best Buy for $10. It's like a 1 foot, at most 1 foot tall tripod, but what's the problem with it? But the thing is, it's sitting on top of a box to stabilize it and to get it up, another 6 inches, because I need a small footprint tripod, but it needs to be raised up higher than the tripod can extend, so that's taking up space. So I think the GoPro would solve that really nicely by sticking it on the wall. Anyway, that's a nice long diversion there into video land, because I love talking about video stuff too. Feel free to ask, if you're curious how the heck I run this Twitch stream and all this Twitch streaming stuff, feel free to ask any questions. I can tell you my entire setup. I've already told you about 80% of it. Okay, so, there we go. So right now I'm just working on the engines of this guy and giving them their base gray color. It's just very tricky because there's little recessed spots here, and you don't want to try to avoid getting the paint outside the recessed spots. But that's not the easiest thing to do, so I'm gonna probably have to go back and repaint a few things, but I can clean that up later. Okay, so back to the Surikari invasion. Oh, I really went off on a random tangent there. The Surikari invasion. Okay, so let's talk about how they approach invading the planet. The first thing to note is to talk about rocketry. Yes, orbital mechanics. Why are orbital mechanics important? Well, they're very important, but in a moment. But before you get to that, there's a concept in modern rocketry called the Hohmann transfer. I think I've talked about this before. The idea is it's a very low energy transfer between planets. And granted, in the Kalidasia universe, you have FTL engines to jump between planets, but certain aspects of that, in terms of matching the orbital velocity of the planet around its parent star, is still relevant. So, because of that, in general, warships or any kind of ships jumping in to a new planet are going to appear in one of several very small regions around the planet relative to the star's position around the sun. Essentially, they're probably going to jump in either directly opposite the planets. Basically, if you think of a line drawn between the star, the parent star, and the planet, you're either going to jump in along that line opposite the star, so basically you'd be behind the planet relative to the star, or between the planet and the star along that line, both relatively close to the particular planet, but both of those relatively close to the planet to where you can make some final adjustments to orbital velocity and be captured by the gravity well of the planet. What's important to note is that in both those cases, or just in terms of the limitations of the Heragul and Surikari jump engines, they're not entirely accurate. They can kind of drop you off anywhere within several thousand kilometers, which is kind of frustrating if you're trying to organize a fleet, but it's just how things work. Now, it's important to note that space is very big, and I don't know if several thousand kilometers might be a little too much of a wide range. I haven't actually done the math, but the point is, it's very easy to get yourself attacking fleets spread out, and that you just got to factor that into your invasion plans because it's just going to happen. Now, even though there's a whole randomness to this process, it doesn't mean that the ships are going to collide with each other. Space is fairly big, so even on a large armada, if it attacks a planet and jumps into a relatively small region, the probability of two ships jumping in the same spot is effectively zero, so don't worry about it. But what this does mean is that a well thought out defender can be ready to start ambushing these ships as they're jumping in. And the Heragul have figured this out, and now that's what they do. When the Surikari get ready to start jumping in, Heragul squadrons head out to these regions, and because of the fact that the Surikari ships are so scattered, it takes them a while to form up into useful squadrons, and the Heragul can get a numerical advantage for a short period of time and pick off ships. So this is the very first phase of the invasion. And this could be an aspect of your storytelling. The Heragul are kind of attempting to stall things for as long as possible. But then, in terms of what would happen, and you can think of this in terms of orbital mechanics, the first thing the Surikari want to do is try to cut off the planet from ships coming in and coming out. So they've already cut initially by jumping into these two locations, because chances are the Surikari fleet would jump into both these common jump locations from the start. They've cut off most of the entryway into the planet, at least the easy entryways into the planet. Now you can jump in anywhere around the planet and still be captured by its gravity well. It just requires much more fuel to do that. And when you're jumping into a combat zone, in the case of all these warships, their fuel expenditure is significantly higher when in combat versus just chilling around the planet. So the less fuel that a ship can spend getting prior to combat is always going to be better, whether it's Surikari or Heragul. But okay, so once the Heragul have kind of retreated from their initial harassment there, where they're trying to break in and disrupt the Surikari invasion, what's going to happen is the Surikari are going to start trying to control areas of the orbit to prevent ships from getting in and getting out. And now this is where a fine balance comes into play. For those of you who've played Kalidasia Fleet Commander, you've seen this. If you haven't, please buy a copy. It's a fantastic game. It really is. I absolutely love Kalidasia Fleet Commander. there's not a whole lot out there like it as far as I can tell. But then again, I don't know. There's so many board games out there today. That's a dangerous statement to say. But you don't find a lot of asymmetrical space combat games. Or just asymmetrical games in general. They're usually, let's move workers around and score lots of points. Because apparently people think that's fun. I don't know, but I think that's the Tabletop Battlefield live stream where I run my mouth about worker placement games. I just don't like them. Anyway, run our mouth again. So the Surikari are going to try to capture the orbital control. Now, you don't need a huge fleet presence to control regions of space because you're really primarily worried about civilian grade freighters. They don't have a lot of weapons, they don't have a lot of armor. There's not going to be a whole lot of ability for these ships to defend themselves, and even less of an ability for these ships to engage and destroy actual military grade warships. Now, there is definitely some concern from Heragul sending in actual warships, because they do send in convoys and stuff has to get through, and that's obviously a problem. But their end result is the Surikari don't need to have lots of forces massed together to control orbit. But this does, like I said, cause a bit of a delicate balance because the Heragul still have plenty of warships at this point. They're just kind of being corralled a little bit, and they're going to take any advantage they can. If they find a small group of Surikari warships a little bit higher up in orbit that they can strike at and drive them back, they're going to do it. And you see this a lot. Like you said, if you play Kalidasia Fleet Commander, the Surikari only needs like one squadron of warships to secure a giant chunk of orbit. But the Heragul can take advantage of that and draw an attack, draw other Surikari forces out of blockading positions, possibly trigger a massive space battle. Because the thing you'll find is the general rule is there's not a lot of huge space battles in the Kalidasia universe. It may seem kind of strange, but the thing is, from both the perspective of the attacker and the attacker doesn't want to throw away warships, because doing so loses their grip on the planet. Oops, I just screwed up a little bit there. That's alright. The defender can't throw away warships because they just don't have enough stuff to throw away. So you get in these situations where you don't want to have large-scale space battles. That's why a lot of the engagements in Legends of Kalidasia are squadron level. You're going to have small squadrons of ships just battle each other out as part of a much larger operation to gain supremacy. And you see this once again with Kalidasia Fleet Commander. I love the fact that game it's a lot of smaller skirmishes, and eventually, for some reason, whether somebody gets desperate and they have to do it, or someone's looking for a killing blow, the game will devolve into a massive epic space battle. But there's probably only going to be one to it because most likely, unless there's a pretty equal loss of ships either side, which generally doesn't happen in space combat because of tactics, a massive space battle is going to be decisive to the invasion of the planet. But, so when it comes to controlling orbit, the first thing the Surikari are going to want to do is just get more warships in an area than this Heragul. And there's ways you can represent this in Legends of Kalidasia. In particular, the domination scenario. This is something that I released originally back in the Admiral Rules pack, but also you can find on the battle report video that I did for 2nd edition where I'm teaching my friend how to play Heroes of the Heragul. You can find a link to a different variation of that in a different mission in that video battle report. And then as the competitive mission pack gets updated here with some new missions, you're going to see that kind of stuff as well play out in a slightly alternative version, but hopefully a little bit faster playing. But the idea is you're just trying to get more control of a region of space than the enemy. And that's kind of what the initial invasion is all about. Then the second part, assuming the Surikari, or the invaders, which are generally the Surikari, we're just going to assume the Surikari and the invaders for the rest of this video. If the Surikari can start gaining control of large portions of the orbit, what the Surikari then want to do is make sure that no one can get through, in or out. And this is represented. I ran a scenario like this at WinterCon this year. It's a very simple one, but it divides the battlefield into columns, depending on the size of the battle, 2 or 3. And you almost run like a little mini domination battle in each column. Because now it's a matter of that this Heragul are trying to find a way to punch through the Surikari lines, and the Surikari are just trying to squash these little small attempts of this Heragul to do this. Because the Heragul are starting to get a little bit desperate, it's getting hard to get resources in and out, and they just have to find a way to smash through their lines in order, you know, to keep the planet alive, right? So, it's looking pretty good. Alright, guns are done. Alright, I'm going to move on to another color. Actually, in just a moment here. I'm going to try to fix my mistake quickly. But, no, I'm not going to fix my mistake. So you kind of see how the scenarios would change a little bit when it goes from just being general blowing stuff up to trying to break through lines and open up these passageways. And that's kind of like the phase 2 of the invasion. At this point, you can also start bringing in civilian transports, which Heroes of the Heragul doesn't have in them, but chances are, if you have a lot of first edition stuff laying around, you have all the tokens you need to use the civilian transports. Just kind of make up some basic rules for them. They're going to get second edition rules and a special scenario a little bit later. I do have a cool scenario for the civilian transports, and I tried to run that at a convention. Oh boy, is it a disaster. Not because there's necessarily anything wrong with the scenario per se, but it's one of those advanced player scenarios because you got to think very differently. Because Legends of Kalidasia is all about the physics behind it, and all about frame of reference. So the idea is, like, you know, in a normal battle, you're a relatively small section of orbit per se. You're just kind of, your warships are flying around. They're trying to, and essentially they're kind of orbiting around the planet in a moving frame of reference, and that's how the battle's occurring. So with the transports one, the frame of reference is around the actual transport moving out of the planet. So all the ship's velocities, for you physics fans out there, are relative to the movement of the transport ships. And because they have a different frame of reference, they move differently. Because they can move relative to their frame of reference, which is kind of different than the restrictions on the other warships. And they could do some weird maneuvers, which is really cool, but it can be confusing if you don't quite understand that. And I found the players are having a heck of a time trying to figure that out and getting frustrated and yelling at me, thinking they're doing crazy psycho maneuvers, when actually I think there's just some issues with understanding physics and frames of reference. But anyway, so now I'm applying some lead belcher. This is one of the silver colors from Games Workshop's line of Citadel paints, and this is just to go over a lot of the gray and make it more silvery. Now, what was that all about? Okay, so that's if you want. You can feel free to use some first edition stuff to play around with creating your own convoy scenarios. Have fun with that, because that's the kind of thing you'd be seeing at this second stage of the invasion. Is that transports, normally, when everything's all going all nice and happy in the Heragul Empire and planet, the transports just kind of come and go, hundreds, if not thousands, every day. I really don't know. But obviously these planets need lots of supplies, so honestly, huge numbers like that is not a crazy concept. But they generally just stick by themselves. They don't need to travel with other warships. They don't need to travel with other convoys, other transports. I mean, they can, especially if they're from the same company or something. But once you get to the second part of the invasion, where you're starting to see large portions of the orbit get cut off by the Surikari, you're going to start seeing the Heragul forming up into military escorted convoys. This is all good old World War I tactics, or World War II tactics, I forget. Probably both. But, you know, it's where ships were getting picked off by the German U-boats. And the solution was you put them in a bunch of convoys escorted by military ships, and you increase the survival rate because the U-boats didn't have the firepower to easily deal with all the military escorts. And you could move a whole bunch of freight across the Atlantic pretty quickly, because of the fact that with a relatively small amount of military gear escorting it. So the Heragul adopt that kind of thing. And so we're going to start seeing a lot of the actual convoy battles. You're going to start seeing the Heragul military just desperately getting as much supplies in, sending warships to smash through lines and get stuff out, and all these kind of things. So that's like the phase 2 of the invasion. You're going to see a lot of that. And we're going to, if you assume that this aspect fails, so at this point the Surikari already have a nice advantage. And this would be the equivalent of, say, a minor victory in the Albion campaigns. This is where Kalen 6 is, for example, where you have the Surikari are starting to strangle the planet. And things like that. But then the final stage, this is what's currently available in the competitive rules pack. This is the first thing I created, was the idea of a containment. From an overall strategic perspective of invading a planet with a star fleet, what you want to do is push the defenders more and more into the gravity well of the planet, so they lack maneuverability and you can kind of pick them off. And they really can't launch counteroffensives easily because they're being, like I said, being pushed in to, oops, those are already done, into their planet. And yeah, and so the containment scenario represents this. The deployment is length is along the short ends and not the long ends of the board, and the battle is all about trying to control both halves or control your own home half and contest the other one, because that kind of represents you're basically just shoving the enemy's ships closer and closer to the planet, or in the case of the guys trying to break it out, you're really pushing back against the invading force and you're pushing the warships back out. And that's kind of like the late game battles. At that point the defenders are probably lost, but they're just trying to hold out as long as possible, where they're launching convoys to get as much stuff off the planet, whatever they deem to be valuable. And there could be a lot of politics going on there. Because the Heragul Empire, a lot of the Heragul, especially in the political sphere, can be very arrogant, and they can really get in some pretty interesting fights with each other about who's got priority. So if they're abandoning a planet and there's limited transports, there's going to be some serious fights and tension over who gets off the planet and why. And you can work that into a narrative storyline, and potentially even have the Heragul warships in space start claiming allegiance to different politicians on the planet, or different businesses and factories, and that can be used as a very interesting and dynamic to really make the end game situation be really messy, instead of just, well, they're slowly getting killed off by the Surikari. And you can also create a nice desperation effect where the Surikari or the Heragul are just trying to get whoever they can off the planet, and there's, you got lots of convoys going out, and just a lot of interesting, very desperate style type storylines you can have there, even if that's where you want the storyline to go. So all in all, I think so far, as I've been rambling on here, there's really about 2 different main storylines: Surikari invasion and the abandoned fleet. So I'll probably condense all this stuff down into 2 short videos. One, I'll probably do the Surikari invasion stuff right now. I can talk about the abandoned fleets. I mean, they're definitely irrelevant to the story at the moment. I've mentioned them before. They're going to be highlighted more in an upcoming release. Probably the next release to Legends of Kalidasia, Heroes of the Heragul, is going to be about them. I think that's probably what I was going to be shooting for. So I might hold off on that video until that comes out, when I got some product to support it, but I'm not sure yet. But I definitely need to talk about the whole aspect of the different... What is going on here? I guess I'm just... Oh, you know what it is? I'm just running out of paint. I'm running out of paint, but I had the paint being mixed on a little bit of like some dry paint, some old dried out paint. and it's just creating a really. It's almost like there's like a solid bubble. It's kind of confusing me, but anyway, just me not paying attention to what's going on. See, this is the whole rambling thing I was talking about, and why I was doing a brain dump. So now I can kind of figure out, okay, what's important with his invasion stuff, and what is Jason rambling on talking about his microphone setup all about? Seriously, I love talking about that stuff. It's fascinating. So many different cool ways to do things, and just really neat. Alright, almost got all the lead belcher on. I think I can go back and apply the Stormhost Silver, and that's the bulk of this process. And I think that'll put me up to about an hour-long painting video, so I think that'll be good for tonight. So I got another 10-15 minutes I'll be sticking around here for getting the last of these heat sinks done. And that's most of the ship design. I think I'll probably do one more video of this series, doing some highlights. I may want to turn this into a Kylon family warship. That can be a disaster, especially for photogenic stuff, but I think I'll try it anyway because I want to have a few of those laying around. I used to years ago, and now that they're actually in the story, it'd be kind of neat to have a few of them. Alright, Stormhost Silver. I'll talk more about the Kylon family warships in a moment here. Stormhost Silver is the super bright silver color in Games Workshop Citadel paint line. I'm just going to spread some of that out and just very quickly run highlights. You don't want this all over it. I'm just picking out some of the areas and just putting a little bit of it down. So the Kylon family warships, you've seen them, if you look at the artwork of Kalidasia, you can tell who they are. Because they have the standard colors of the Starlight District here, this beige and brown thing going on. But they also will have these series of stripes. They're usually brown, and they run from one end of the warship to the next. And that's just the symbol that the captains will have painted on their ships, saying they're basically an allegiance, whether they're commanded by a Kylon family member, or they simply claim allegiance to them, or they respect them as for their military history. There's a lot of things going on as to why that might be the case. But I think I'm going to figure out how to make that work here. But what I have to do first is inevitably when I paint all these little details up, I slop paint around. I got to go back in with some of the desert yellow over here. Desert yellow, which is the army painter paints that I'm using. The army painter paints that I use for the... Oh, I missed this whole area too. Whoops, that's alright. I didn't do a very good job of cleaning it up, did I? My bad. This is one of the sprue points here on the miniature. Both the backs of the engines have sprue points for the pewter miniature, and if you don't do a very good job cleaning them up, it looks really nasty. I didn't do a very good job cleaning up in this miniature. What was I talking about? Okay, so I gotta go back in with the desert yellow and the oak brown and just kind of clean up where I slopped all the silver around a little bit. That's not a big process. It just takes a little bit of fiddling and details and cleans it up, and that just ends up making it look a lot more professional, a lot cleaner, and looks a lot better when you do nice close-up photography of it. And the last thing I'm gonna do here is with some of these engine parts, I'm taking the Nun Oil Gloss, which is one of the shades, is my favorite, probably my favorite shade from Games Workshop's paint line. And it lets you darken areas up, but still makes them kind of shiny like they're metal. So I'm just going to take some of the gloss here, and just very small amounts of it, because, the standard, as I always say with this kind of shade, you could always add more shade to miniature, you can't take it away. And just wherever there's little ravines and crevices around the engines here, just put some of it. That's going to help bring out detail. But I think I've talked plenty about the basics of the Surikari invasion, some ideas how you can work in little intrigue and conspiracy and stories like that into your narrative campaigns of Legends of Kalidasia. There's plenty more to talk about this kind of a thing, especially when you get the Kolith Guard involved and what they're up to, because they have multiple agendas depending on what sub-faction you're dealing with. And you can always do, weird things like in the Exterion Fleet's areas, like the encounter at Baron Sekar has something to it. And, feel free to play around with stories involving Heragul versus Heragul or Surikari versus Surikari. Just make something up, you can do that. That's the beauty of a tabletop game. You don't have to stick within whatever the prescribed story is. You can create your own weird engagement. Heck, you could, if you really wanted to, tell some story from Heragul past of some civil war, even though there really weren't very many. But there's definitely situations where the Heragul fought each other. Captain Zarexlet's been in those engagements before for various reasons. So it does happen historically, even if it's not happening right at the moment. We could create a whole, story about that. The ship designs they have are, upwards of 1,000 years old in some cases. So the fact that you're using, quote, modern Heragul warships isn't that big of a deal. And heck, you guys make your own stat cards if you want to. Second edition stat cards are pretty easy. There's nothing much to them. So I'm just putting a little bit more of this nun oil, just a little bit around some of the gun barrels and things, just to give them a little bit darker to look. And then I got these cooling fins back here. I'm gonna put a little bit around to kind of help sell those effects a little bit also. Alright, well I think that's gonna be just about enough for me here. Let me bring back up my main camera and we can call the night's live stream done. And I think there's going to be one more of this, but I'll talk about that in just a minute or two. Let me jump back over to this seat. So I like to mention in weird random little bits of video. There we go. I've got two different stools that I film with. I have the one I'm sitting on right now for the main camera, and then I got another one in front of me that I sit on when I'm actually doing the painting. It's just easier that way, trust me. Because they have different heights and different desk heights and all sorts of weird crap. Okay, so anyway, I think that's the end of part 4 here of painting the Heragul Hammerhead miniature. There's probably going to be one more part. There are some little details left. The javelin missile launchers, paint those red. The barrels of the gun, paint those red. Do some little engine exhaust effects. Clean things up a little bit. And I said I think I will probably attempt the Kylon stripes. Even though they can kind of not be the most photogenic, if you screw them up, I do want to have a warship like that, so you get an idea of if you wanted to actually create a fleet of Kylon ships, because you can, because they're really a main family talked about in 2nd edition in Heroes of the Heragul. You can learn all about them in that rule book. And I know in some of the other live streams we talked about them, their culture, and what's going on with them. So it'd be kind of cool if you wanted to pursue a slightly different storyline approach to your Heragul fleet than your typical mainline rah-rah go central government kind of a thing. Did I say that? I should have said that yet. My bad. Hey, forget about that. That's not part of the storyline. Nothing like that. So anyway, so probably one more episode of that, and I think after I get that done, I have 2 options that I'm gonna do, and I think I'm gonna start rebuilding this guy. Mainly because I can and I really want to. I'm practicing more interesting cosplay techniques. But I also want to put an approach in terms of designing the battle armor for Kalidasia to where there's actually an element of practicality to it. Sci-fi battle armor is in general not very practical. As anyone who's ever tried to do cosplay knows, there's tons of problems with it, and there's very good reasons why modern military soldiers don't have stuff like the Master Chief battle armor. At least not yet. In particular, it's not very mobile. You'll find that, if you had some guy in like sci-fi battle armor, an actual soldier, if he dropped his gun, he's screwed. You can't pick it up. I mean, I've got other suits of armor you guys see me work on. Even this thing, if you were to drop here's the gun for it, what's left of the gun anyway, down here. You can see the nice orange barrel, Nerf gun barrel tip there. If you were to drop this sucker in combat, in a suit like this, you're not picking it up.
The movement's so restricted, you can't pick the things up. So I want to think a lot about, in terms of designing the new battle armor, to actually be somewhat practical as real battle armor. I want to get away, for the most part, from this weird plasticky sci-fi stuff. Races like the Kolaith Guard and Krylon have that for different reasons because it makes sense. The Kolaith Guard from a biological reason, Krylon because it's not armor, it's a shield generator. But alas, the Heragul, this is supposed to be actual body armor to stop the kind of weapons the Heragul would be fighting against. I.e. mainly their own weapons, which don't work very well against Surikari, but you know. Or sorry, which granted the Surikari armor doesn't really, Surikari weapons kind of go right through this because they're a different type of battle damage. But anyway, random blah blah blah. The point is, I'm going to try to be rebuilding this guy probably after I'm done with the Heragul Hammerhead, and that's all contingent on that rambling I had a while ago talking about the new LED light panel and camera, which I probably will have time to do. But anyway, with all that out of the way, once again, I am Jason. For more information on the Kalidasia universe, or to find out how you can purchase this miniature here, you can head over to Kalidasia.com. You can find the URL right down here in the video, hanging around down there, and you can find some of the previous videos in this series. It'll all end up there eventually, and I will do a recap video, so you don't have to watch 5 hours of video of me going on and on. If you want to learn how to paint a Heragul Hammerhead, I will definitely reduce that down. But with that out of the way, I want to thank you guys for watching, and have a good night.